Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amelia Redhill, and I will be your host and moderator today. First off, I want to thank you for joining us for our public lecture series. As some of you may know, we've held our public lecture series for the past 30 years, and this year we're doing things a little bit differently. Now that we're virtual, we're hopeful that we can reach a larger audience and have you come back every single month to hear new and exciting science from the USGS. Before I introduce our speaker, I have several announcements to make. Next month, we have Mike Tischler, Director of the National Geospatial Program, who will be giving us an overview of the program and the products that they have available. So please try to join us on April 22nd at 7:00 p.m. Pacific Time. And now, here are some tips on how to turn on a couple of features on this platform. To turn on the closed captioning on your desktop, you can do so by clicking on the gear-shaped icon button located on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Closed captions on your mobile device can be turned on by tapping on your phone and clicking on the closed caption TV icon located at the bottom of the corner of your screen. Toward the end of the lecture, we will open it up to a question and answer session. If you have a question for the speaker, you can submit them through the Q&A chat window. To find the Q&A chat window, look for the question mark icon on the upper left-hand corner of your screen. That'll bring out the panel where you can type in your question. If you are on your mobile device, you can click on the question mark icon located on the upper right-hand corner of your screen and submit your question in the Ask a Question field box. Please keep in mind that we might not be able to get to all the questions that may come through, but we do appreciate your understanding in advance. And now, it's time to introduce you to our speaker this evening, Dr. Laura Norman. She is a supervisory research physical scientist at the USGS, where she has worked since 1998. She received her PhD in watershed management from the University of Arizona, with a minor in remote sensing and spatial analysis. She has published over 60 peer-reviewed journal articles on a wide range of topics, including environmental health, cross-border policy, regional planning, ecosystem services, and restoration design. Laura, it's great to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Hang on just one sec. Go.
Hello again. We're going to try this again. So I'm starting from the beginning. I was asked to share a talk about ecology of the US-Mexico border and communicate my science in a fun, interesting manner to a non-technical audience. So I've arranged my presentation as such to tell you about this place, some people, and some of the work that we are doing in it. As I start with the US-Mexico border, I understand that many of you have heard about the challenges here. But there is another story to be told about opportunity that is created when two countries share an international frontier, and that is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to tell you about the home that I love, where the seamless fusion of traditions, customs, and society create a sweet and relaxing ambrosia, where everyone understands and contributes to an ever-evolving Spanglish language. A space where cowboys, farmers, artisans, builders, and research physical scientists are most productive before noon. A place where almost everyone loves tacos. A place we call Borderlandia. Well, some of us do anyway. A land of great opportunity. The USGS is the science bureau within the United States Department of Interior, and just about 25 years ago, scientists from the USGS subdivided the international linear border into 8 different shared water resource areas. In the eastern region, El Paso to the Gulf of Mexico, this runs parallel along the course of the Rio Grande. In the western region, water flows north and/or south into the interiors of each country, creating dependencies on each other in terms of potential vulnerability and impacts on natural resources. My research in the Borderlands has been focused in the Arizona-Sonoran region, in an area referred to as the Mexican or Apache Highlands. I have looked at contaminant transport and mapped colonias, which are vulnerable communities in the borderlands that lack adequate housing or infrastructure. I've examined and forecasted urban development and land use change around colonias using various models and investigated trade-offs between ecosystem services being generated and received binationally. For hundreds of years, the borderlands have been home to a small indigenous and immigrant human populations in recent years. These population centers have grown. The Mexico-United States border is now the most frequently crossed border in the world. Regional planning and infrastructure are hard-pressed to keep up with the expansion of sister city areas, which is intensified by the administration variants. While urban development might be the obvious human disturbance during this time frame and change in population, other disturbances include water diversion, groundwater pumping, livestock grazing, land clearing, fencing, the elimination of native species, and the introduction of non-native animals and plants. Arid lands constitute the largest terrestrial biome on Earth, home to more than 20% of the world's population. You see on this map that the entire US-Mexico border and much of the western US is considered semi-arid or arid. By definition, arid lands have limited rainfall and high temperatures. The study of ecohydrology here provides insight into other biomes where impacts are less pronounced. And as you may know, arid environments are expanding. In my lifetime, over the past 50 years, the United States has warmed by 2.4 degrees Fahrenheit. In Tucson, that's more like 4.3 degrees Fahrenheit. In 2008, projected changes in temperature and precipitation under a suite of climate models identified the borderlands to be a hotspot for changing climate in the future. And now we realize that the southwestern United States and Mexico are already in the start of a mega drought, a decades-long dry spell punctuated by severe droughts, which began around the year 2000. Warming incurs a loss of land and productivity in the borderlands, where marginalized communities like those living in colonias have little insurance and are not positioned well to adapt to perils associated with extreme drought or floods. The sister city areas of Ambos Nogales exemplifies these issues. The Nogales watershed is about 250 square kilometers, half of which is in Mexico and half of which is in the United States. It is home to over 250,000 people. Water flows north from Mexico, and as you can see, most of the urban area flanks the Nogales Wash and is situated in the floodplain that drains the center of this watershed. When it rains in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, stormwater flows downhill through colonias, picking up whatever sediment and debris it's in contact with and transporting it across the US-Mexico border. While these life-sustaining waters are extremely valuable, in extreme events pictured here on the bottom left, the stormwater overwhelms the transport system set in place to handle it, causing flooding, which puts livelihoods, public health, and human lives at risk. In 2009 and 2010, I began looking at how to manage international flood hazards with gabions, wirework containers filled with rock, and modeling their proposed placement in the watershed. We used mock-ups that were supplied by the city engineers for developing the gabion dimensions to spec to portray backfilling the channel upstream. And ran the kinematic runoff erosion model to predict gabion's impact. Resulting hydrographs compared the discharge with no gabion, a red line, and if gabion is installed at this location in the blue line. In a small storm pictured here, the gabion reduces the peak flow. And similarly, with a little bit larger storm, a 25-year event. However, when the big storms come through, portrayed here with the 100-year event, the gabion is unable to reduce flooding. Some locations portray structures having little impacts on any size rain events. We use the model to identify areas where gabions would do the most good. This is a climate change adaptation tool where structures can help mitigate flooding impacts. I'm getting a text that people aren't able to see anything, so I'm not sure if our things are live. Okay. And something we learned that was very pronounced at all locations is that the model portrays the gabions to be retaining sediment, which stressed the need for regular maintenance, as gabions will likely fill up. Now I'm going to switch gears for a minute and tell you about my backyard. When I first moved to Tucson, Arizona, I was completely bewildered when I first saw a bobcat, and I confess at this time that I literally said, maybe he escaped from the Desert Museum, which is an amazing zoo amongst other things. My husband, a native Tucsonan and avid outdoorsman, laughed at me. Arizona is home to 4 species of wildcats: bobcat, puma, ocelot, and jaguar, though the survival of the latter 2 is threatened by habitat loss, wildlife trafficking, and retaliatory killings. Now, I just happened to stumble across this hide and framed photo when I was at the Game and Fish for the White Mountain Apache last year, about 200 miles north of the US-Mexico border. Apologies for my cell phone's glare, but according to the note in the photo, this animal was taken in 1964. It is my understanding that this is the last known female jaguar in the United States. In 1972, the jaguar was protected under the Endangered Species Act, but by 1990, jaguars were thought to have been eliminated from the US. Until 1996, when Warner Glenn, a native Arizona rancher and mountain lion hunter, came across an adult male jaguar in the Peninsula Mountains and captured these amazing photos, published in his book, Eyes of Fire. 6 months later, and 150 miles to the west, another houndsman, Jack Childs and Matt Calvin, treed a second jaguar in the Babakivri Mountains, with pictures published in a book by he and his wife, ambushed on the Jaguar Trail. These beautiful animals are an icon of biodiversity and inspires habitat conservation. The jaguar is the largest cat in the Americas that once roamed as far north as the Grand Canyon, but is now endangered in both the United States and Mexico. Just last week, a study was published that suggests some of that historic range is still viable. Agencies like these, and I've only copied logos from the ones that I know of, but many people are working to identify and promote safe passage for jaguars to travel in by allowing known corridors to rewild. Rewilding means restoring and protecting natural processes in wilderness areas. This may include providing connectivity between such areas and protecting or reintroducing apex predators and keystone species. Jaguars need a lot of space to sow their wild oats, and corridors help connect subpopulations to ensure that their genetic diversity remains robust. According to the Center for Biological Diversity, 7 different male jaguars have been seen in the United States at locations identified by green stars in the last 25 years, all in the Sky Islands or mountain ranges of the Madrean Archipelago Ecoregion. In the last quarter century, the jaguars have identified their preference for the Madrean Archipelago Ecoregion, and they're not the only ones. Variations in topography and associated climate enhance the biotic richness of these mountain islands and the surrounding deserts. And the habitats afforded along each gradient provide a home to a huge variety of species. Conservation International designated 36 biodiversity hotspots around the world. These land masses support more than half of the world's plant species and almost half of the bird, mammal, reptile, and amphibians. 2 of these global hotspots exist in the United States, and one is the Madrean Archipelago, or Sky Islands region. The mountains, or Sky Islands, act like stepping stones through the valleys or desert seas, connecting the Rocky Mountains to the north and the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico to the south, bounded in the east by the Chihuahuan Desert and the Sonoran Desert to the west. This ecoregion is recognized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as critical habitat for all of these threatened or endangered species and more, which means it is essential to these species conservation. Now, I'm not sure if you know this, but we are entering the planet's 6th mass extinction, thought to be amplified by human actions and our expanding industrialized civilization. This was brought to my attention in a presentation last month by Dr. Terry Root, noted climate scientist and leading author of the assessment reports of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. She said that if we add in the IPCC predictions of a raise in 3.6 degrees, an additional quarter of the world's total species will be extirpated. The United Nations have identified and declared ecosystem services to be an international priority. Ecosystem services are the benefits that people receive from nature. These, in addition to biodiversity, are key to sustainable development for our planet. An ecosystems services approach is portrayed here. Our natural resources are the capital we have, and that we need science to understand. The services they provide or benefits need to be properly evaluated, and climate and land use change are some of the drivers that can impact these. But humans have choices about how their interactions are received. Okay, so humans. In the early 1900s, there was a concerted effort to remove large predators to make the American West safer for livestock. Trappers were hired to kill jaguars, wolves, and other carnivores. Some of you may be familiar with the trophic cascade that was documented at the Yellowstone National Park, wherein the extirpation of gray wolves caused prey species like elk to flourish, and their populations caused significant damage to streamside vegetations, which altered morphology and hydrology. And likewise, using a bottom-up approach, we saw that with the reintroduction of the wolves, the prey species were reduced, allowing the aspen, willow, and cottonwood stands to recover, and the morphology of river channels to be restored. Human interactions with this ecosystem portray serious repercussions on the biodiversity, both negative and positive. In 2013, I met this wonderful man and very well-known ecologist, Dr. Ron Pulliam, a retired professor from the University of Georgia, who was the director and saving grace of the National Biological Service, which became the USGS Biological Resources Division, and former science advisor to Secretary of Interior, Bruce Babbitt. As a publishing scientist, I just have to tell you that this one paper has been cited well over 6,000 times. There is even a paper written about the 20-year impact of this paper, with estimates of his research being cited by over 25,000 other papers. Ron Pulliam is undoubtedly one of the most influential scientists of our time and has made many profound contributions to underlying ecological theories being taught in schools today. He is acknowledged as the father of the source sink model, and perhaps as the most enamored with grassland sparrows. Ron retired from academia here in Arizona and founded the Borderland Restoration Network with his friend Gary Nabhan, where they have beguiled and enchanted many other smart and conscious people with exciting designs for protected areas, harvesting of resources, and forward-looking grassroots solutions. I found Ron at Sonoran Institute's annual research meeting, where he was presenting some of these ideas, this bottoms-up approach from an arid lands perspective. And he was boldly suggesting that when you effectively restore streams and watersheds, then biodiversity increases. And he was presenting results from some research he'd been doing looking at habitats developing around gabions. You might recall that I mentioned a study I had been doing in Ambos Nogales looking at how gabions could help reduce floods and capture sediment deposition. Ron was describing research he was doing at Cienega San Bernardino, where large rock structures, gabions, were being installed to restore a wetland under the guidance of this little rock star, Valera Austin Clark. Valera is the founder of Cuenca Los Ojos Foundation, CLO, which works to preserve and restore the biodiversity of the US-Mexico borderlands through land protection, habitat restoration, and wildlife introduction. She's not only working on the ground all the time, but she is also working to spread information about the simplicity of using rock detention structures and the successes being achieved. She regularly presents her work at science conferences, political assemblies, and society affairs. She's cited in books, blogs, radio shows, journals, and regularly in newspapers, most recently in regard to the impacts of the US-Mexico wall. She works with school children, neighbors, foreign liaisons, scientists, and indigenous people on both sides of the US-Mexico border. Fluent in English, Spanish, and French, she is regularly recognized for her conservation work and advocacy, most recently as our local genius in Tucson. In summary, Valera Austin Clark is a poster child for restoration of the Sky Islands. And at that time, she and her equally fabulous husband, Josiah Austin, owned and managed over 200,000 acres of ranch land in the Madrean Archipelago, half in the US and half in Mexico. To put that into perspective, the Saguaro National Park here in Tucson, the 41st largest national park in the US, is under half that size. While they have divorced since, they still maintain these properties colored in purple, and more separately, all of which are strategically located between protected lands in the United States and Mexico. The Austins have installed thousands and thousands and thousands of rock detention structures in their ecological restoration portfolio. Rock detention structures are not a new technology. Indigenous communities in the southwestern US and Mexico had used rock dams to grow their crops and control erosion and flooding. And archaeologists have identified rock detention structures here dating back from 1,000 years before the Common Era. And right about here, in the northern Sierra Madre, is where Aldo Leopold visited in 1936 and 1937 and wrote about the old terrace builders who were not deceived into thinking it to be a hard and stony land, for they knew it by experience to be a land of milk and honey. In 2013, we realized that there were a lot of people and agencies who were interested in achieving the same goals. We gathered together in what we called the Sky Island Restoration Collaborative, a grassroots consortium working to share and integrate conservation efforts and preserve the biodiversity of the Madrean Archipelago Ecoregion. That is when I launched the USGS Arid Land Water Harvesting Study. The archaeologists had seen it, and the restoration practitioners were doing it, but for some reason their approaches were being met with skepticism and doubt. Agencies and funders wanted metrics associated with products to leverage grant dollars with. There was a need for research and applied science that made full use of modern technology in conjunction with traditional knowledge. And so I set out on my mission to quantify the impacts of rock detention structures and document any ecosystem services provided by them. At the headwaters of the Rio Yaqui watershed is the largest, most extensive wetland in the region, the Cienega San Bernardino. Ownership and management is divided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge, pictured in blue, and by CLO, south of the border, in orange. Aside from offering refuge in the corridors discussed already for birds and mammals, Cienega San Bernardino provides a home for the native fish in the Rio Yaqui watershed. Ron and I joined forces here to see if we could use his knowledge of vegetation and habitat changes on the ground with USGS capabilities to step back in time using Landsat satellite imagery to analyze changes at and around gabions. Specifically, we examined the differences in plant reflectance captured by satellites to assess the density of live green vegetation for the years 1984 through 2011. Managers at both the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge and CLO property had been installing gabion structures in and around the historic Cienega. We partitioned out areas to observe those that were treated with gabions and selected areas that hadn't been as controls. Over the 27-year study, we documented that vegetation died or declined at most of our control targets, correlating with declines in precipitation. But vegetation was maintained and improved at most of our targets, treated with structures, despite the drought conditions. I want to call your attention here to the arid land environment that we live in. The structures were proven to be a mitigation strategy to better utilize less precipitation, a climate adaptation strategy for the region. We then extended our study to examine upstream and downstream and included an additional index to tease out the wetland signatures. This was based on the research that Natalie Wilson had explored previously in her master's thesis. Our analysis reiterated the potential of structures to support healthy vegetation that we had seen before, and it extended our results to include areas up to 5 kilometers downstream of structures and 1 kilometer upstream. Now, just up the hill from the Cienega San Bernardino is the Malpai Ranch, where Warner and his late wife, Wendy Glenn, had set up house. You might remember Warner from his run-in with the Jaguar back in 1996. Malpai is a Spanish word that means badlands and defines the rough country underlain by dark lava and volcanic landforms. A lot of things were actually happening in the 90s with and around the glens. Quite notably, the Malpai Borderlands group originated in 1994 when the Nature Conservancy purchased a conservation easement on the massive Gray Ranch. Since then, the group has coordinated and expanded their conservation property management to nearly 2 million acres. This group of cowboys, ranchers, and conservationists work together and collaborate with environmental scientists and government agencies in what they call the Radical Center to create sustainable management plans. This top picture was taken in the Glens barn in 1995, and the picture below is more recent. Working with the Malpai, the USDA and BLM wanted to restore stream function and slow water down on the Malpai Ranch before it reached the Cienega San Bernardino. Van Clothier, restoration practitioner and noted author who wrote Let the Water Do the Work, was contracted to develop a plan for restoration. Here's one of the many treatments he prescribed, called a plug and pond type project, where he plugged a straightaway gully, see the mapped yellow area, funneled water into a pond in blue, and induced meander into the Wildcat Draw tributary, green, of Silver Creek, using rock structures and vegetations to guide it. I'm going to zoom in here to this little spot to show you how that worked. And Natalie Wilson had photo documented the vegetation response at structures. This picture was from 2015, looking downstream at a Roskin cross vein with Sacaton plugs. You can see the channel area there then was pretty barren. These are one rock dam style structures, angled so flow is diverted over the rock walls and concentrated down the center of the channel. Now here's a picture taken from the exact same spot 2 years later and after it had been treated with Sacaton plugs. And here in 2018, 3 years later, Natalie's documented a strong annual response, specifically an amaranth and pigweed, in addition to Sacaton's survival. This vegetation, sediment, and water are starting to function like wetlands on the Malpai Ranch. Natalie has been repeat visiting most of the study sites I'm presenting today, collecting ground reference data to monitor vegetation change for the past 5 years. She's been analyzing and documenting response at many types of structures and is about to release a giant data set she's compiled as part of the Arid Land Water Harvesting Project. Her preliminary results confirm increased short-term local responsive vegetation at rock detention structures. In addition to quantifying the density of vegetation on the ground, she's also classifying species and has noted some new water obligates popping up around study sites where they hadn't previously been. These plants are associated with prolonged saturation or flooding that you'd see in wetlands. Moving west is the cultivating and captivating Kate Tyrion, founder and executive director of the Deep Dirt Farm Institute in Patagonia, Arizona, where she teaches arid lands permaculture with a focus on youth empowerment. Kate noticed active and aggressive erosion in a tributary of her property and was interested to utilize the rock detention structures that she'd seen installed by CLO to help mitigate the gully formation. Our friends, Steve and Whitney DeLong, helped acquire a very high resolution before scan to preserve dimensions of the base conditions. This is a little movie that portrays some of the data that was captured using light in the form of a pulsed laser to measure variable distances to a surface. From this, a bare earth digital terrain model was developed using the exact dimensions of the gully's topography. I used the high-resolution DTM in the Kinneros model to solve partial differential equations for a series of precipitation events and determine the potential runoff and sediment yield forcing to build the structures for. Borderlands Restoration Network Director at the time, Dr. David Seibert, worked with Kate and others to install several structures in Bone Creek, including 1 rock dams, check dams, and 1 gabion, to moderate flow velocities, arrest gully erosion, and encourage sediment deposition. And then Joel Sankey and David Dean came down from the USGS and went back out to capture the repeat scans of the gully after structures had been installed. From this, you can see the changes in erosion and deposition over time, how the gabion feature controlled erosion and halted the gully development. I ran another model, the International River Interface Cooperative called IRIC, NAIS 2DH solver, to test and compare the predictions of bedform shift with our findings in the field using LiDAR. The resulting change in elevation from the model follows the trends identified in the terrestrial LiDAR dataset, with matching patterns of erosion in red and deposition in blue. Particle tracking afforded in the IRIC model is useful to identify sediment movements and portray the weak area of the gabion that would eventually breach. Model results also predict increased duration and depths of water, standing pools, and decreased velocity incurred by gabion installations. The new structures were mitigating impacts of flood events. This video in the Chiricahua Mountains was taken on a perennial reach and portrays flash flooding downstream, wrought with sediment and debris. In the desert southwest, our rainfall comes in fits and spurts, feast or famine. Sometimes when a rainfall event in the mountains occurs, we see a delayed but then flashy runoff response impact the stream flows. Then you blink and it's over. At El Coronado Ranch, just up the hill from this, Josiah and Valere had installed thousands of check dams in a tributary called Turkey Pen to slow water down, arrest channel downcutting, and reduce sediment transport in the watershed. There were rumors that we had heard about this oasis in the Chiricahuas and questions about its existence. They were finding that the area that had been treated with check dams was maintaining water in it where it hadn't before. We developed a study to examine the rainfall runoff response of a watershed treated with check dams, the Turkey Pen, and an adjacent watershed which had none, Rock Creek, a classic paired watershed study. We mapped 2,000 check dams in the watershed with help from volunteers, Joan and Kathleen. Some older structures were completely buried, and there are new structures built on top, but there are structures everywhere. Working with Fletcher Brinkeroff from the Arizona Water Science Center and Evan Gwilliam from the National Park Service, we installed a stream gauge to monitor the rainfall runoff response at outlets of both of these watersheds over the course of one rainy season. Products were used to describe aspects of hydrologic condition that influence stream ecosystems, overall variability, stream flashiness, and the duration of response. We found that the treated watershed that had been treated with rock detention structures had a reduced rate of flow. Those flashy flood events were reduced by half, yet also portrayed 28% more volume than the untreated watershed and portrayed extended timing of summer base flows. So again, the structures are a climate mitigation strategy that reduce flooding, but also harvest rainfall and augment water supplies during the low flow season. We hypothesized that the perennial pools of water that have formed behind structures create multiple small perched water tables underground that slowly release water. Which leads me to the Baba Kamari Ranch, owned and operated by the Brophy family since 1935 in the binational San Pedro watershed. This 28,000-acre land parcel is the largest contiguous private land parcel in Arizona, managed with a commitment to conservation, stewardship, wildlife, and cattle. Together with Borderlands Restoration and CLO, we developed a proposal to test the extent to which rock detention structures were impacting infiltration and could ultimately help recharge the groundwater aquifer, and our research was funded by the Walton Family Foundation. First, Dr. Laurel Locker and I ran and coupled surface water and groundwater models to identify locations where surface to groundwater injection might be more receptive. At these locations, gabions and many other various structures were installed by Borderlands Restoration Network under the direction of Trevor Hare. USGS mentored a student, Miss Chloe Fandel, who was working on her master's degree at the time, and acquired field measurements at and around gabions. Her research demonstrated increased soil moisture at gabions averaging about 10% increase in infiltration at structures. When interwoven with a larger watershed model, I estimated the potential of watershed-wide gabion installation could increase total aquifer recharge by at least 4%, with noted increases at structures in subsurface connectivity and accentuated lateral flow contributions. The model portrayed increased soil water storage at gabions. Going back to our paired watershed study, you can clearly see that the water in the turkey pen treated with check dams is more clear. The more total suspended solids in the water, the murkier it seems, and the higher the turbidity, portrayed on the left, our control. Turbidity is considered as a good measure of water quality. Throughout the world, erosion control structures are installed to capture sediment. In fact, that is the #1 reason that they have been used. This study was to evaluate the amount of potential sediment being captured by structures in the watershed. I calibrated the soil and water assessment tool using the discharge measurements we'd collected from the field to extrapolate and extend the analysis over a 3-year simulation to examine the impact of structures on sediment yield. Model results depict a minimum precipitation event of 15 millimeters, a little more than 1/2 of an inch, to instigate the detachment of soil sediment or rock from the study area, which occurred about 2% of the time. Mean annual soil loss in the treated watershed was predicted to be about 792 tons per year, where 210 tons of sediment was estimated to be stored behind check dams per year. It would take about 5 years for the structures to capture 1,000 tons of sediment, which is how much this boulder weighs. We began thinking about the properties of all that soil. Working with James Caligari, a soils hydrologist at the USGS, we wrote a proposal and were funded by the Land Carbon Program in the USGS to investigate biological and geochemical processes at restoration sites. We collected soils all around structures at El Coronado Ranch and analyzed isotope ratios of carbon and nitrogen to characterize the potential for all soil carbon storage behind the structures. Using the sediment yield estimates derived from my calibrated SWAT model and taking into account the size of the watershed and number of structures that we had calculated, the rate of carbon capture for rock detention structures is about 200 to 250 metric tons per hectare. That is equivalent to what is stored in wetlands. Now, when James first said that, my ears perked up. Wetlands? Wetland is an antonym for arid land. Okay, so to summarize so far, I have shown you scientific study and resulting evidence that rock detention structures in the Madrean Archipelago detain flashy floodwaters, hold soil in place, increase soil water storage, promote vegetation viability, and sequester carbon. Now I'll go one step further. Rock detention structures are effectively creating freshwater wetlands, distinct ecosystems flooded by water. In arid lands, these are called cienagas, some by restoring historic cienagas, but others are creating new wetland-like ecosystems in riparian channels. And the development of cienagas with their suite of well-known ecosystem services is marketable. Now, these experiments were all designed to quantify biophysical results and put numbers to the things that Valère and Ron were already telling everyone about. But we felt we were missing a human component to describe how people feel about restoration and land conservation. We wanted to document the strong response that people have when they see these structures bring water back to the landscape without hosting a tour for everyone in the world. We turned to the SOLVES model developed by the USGS to guide us. In 2016 and 17, Oliver Lysau, who was an economics student intern at Borderlands Restoration and working with biophilia, created a study to administer to a pilot group, the town of Patagonia, Arizona, and sent it out to 665 people in the watershed of Sonoyta Creek. Each respondent was asked to assign a collection of 100 points for whichever of the 12 social values listed here that they felt were important to them, and draw the locations where their assigned values occurred on a paper map. Then Roy Petrakis, a USGS geographer, used the SOLVES model to map and tally the survey's response data in relationship to environmental geospatial data to quantify spatially explicit outputs of the perceived social values, summed in the map on the left. Established riparian areas had the highest value across the watershed. people were valuing water and the riparian restoration effects. When compared with the land ownership map on the right, we also found that land set aside for conservation or easements are the most important to the town. We conclude that this type of valuation could be very useful to identify new lands to set aside for conservation that would represent the community's values and garner public support. Which leads me over to the Cienega Ranch, where Josiah Austin has been working tirelessly to revive his property and preserve it, to make homes for all the birds, bats, fish, frogs, bugs, snakes, turtles, lizards, and mammals around, while running a full-on cattle ranch. He has enacted a phased plan of conservation easements to secure the land and is expanding, removing fences, and practicing a lighter grazing rotation. Additionally, he is making water drinkers available throughout the ranch for livestock and wildlife and investing in extensive watershed restoration. On Cienega Ranch, in Cienega Creek, Joe has been working to harvest and detain spring discharge and rainfall runoff to augment base flow and slowly leak out to restore and sustain the wetland Cienega that is the ranch's namesake. Using these rock detention structures that he calls a leaky weir. These structures are situated and cemented in bedrock but designed to leak, as you can see from the resulting pool being fed downstream to my dog. USGS is expanding our experiments to quantify the impacts of these structures and the hydrologic budget, and working with partners at ADEQ, who collected water samples downstream from a weir, finding 0 E. coli despite cattle grazing upstream, we are investigating the potential of these structures to filter pollutants. Peter Warren, a scientist at the Nature Conservancy and member of the Malpai Borderlands group, recently wrote that Cienega Ranch is part of the Chiricahua landscape, which, contiguous with the Malpai area and when considered together, almost doubles the size of the region's undeveloped wild area. And I would add to you today that if you include the land being protected south of the border by CLO and Llanos Biosphere Reserve, it just might be more than tripled. And the Sky Island stepping stone is protected in these conserved landscapes on both sides of the international border. In fact, all of the ranches and landscapes I've discussed today, so far today, make up a larger patchwork conservation quilt, where partners are doing everything they can and then linking hands to try to save this special place. All of the research I have presented in the Arid Land Water Harvesting Study are dependent on partners at the CERC. The USGS is not a land owning or management agency with no expansive outdoor laboratories. We are also not professional restoration practitioners with no training or experience in building rock detention structures. We are scientists working with other scientists and are trying to respond to stakeholder needs, interest in adaptive management, protecting biodiversity, and conservation of their land. CERC was founded on this shared vision of preserving biodiversity and the concept of developing a restoration economy, where ecological and socioeconomic benefits are interconnected and complementary, and people are part of the working sustainable ecosystem. I should pause here to mention that the CERC effort, and maybe the acronym, had a lot of driving force from this mama bear, Michelle Girard, who recently retired from the Forest Service. Michelle is still working, wearing various hats in her retirement to continue this mission. A great example of how the CERC is being integrated began when Coronado National Forest managers saw the success at El Coronado Ranch, where USGS had documented increased water availability resulting from their check dams. Michelle asked me to present the larger watershed model of the Chiricahua Mountains to the Douglas District. The ranger at the time, Kevin Warner, used the results to select areas with moderate sediment yield to install new structures on the Forest Service land and to identify environmental impacts for the NEPA analysis they needed. Then, the Sky Island Alliance and Borderlands Restoration Network installed a series of rock detention structures, training volunteers from Mexico, who are shown, the Borderlands Earth Care Youth Group, and also a prison work crew, all separately. And we're able to create this beautiful channel. In another example, CERC partners under the charge of Deborah Taslin at the Bureau of Reclamation merged with climate scientists from Northern Arizona University and restoration practitioners from Natural Channel Design to test and document structures outside of the Sky Islands in the city of Phoenix, Arizona, one of the hottest cities in the United States. Results from this research mimic the results we'd seen in the Madrean, with decreases in peak flows and increases in infiltration at structures. Results also suggest a 3-degree microclimate cooling effect for at least 2 days following rainfall events at treated sites. This climate mitigation strategy of installing rock detention structures would likely have cumulative cooling effects, and our preliminary findings are extremely promising. So here we are. Throughout my talk, I have been describing years of scientific research analyzing impacts of rock detention structures documented by the USGS Arid Land Water Harvesting Study, and introducing these results in terms of major ecosystem services summarized and published last year. The ecosystem services are flood detention, habitat provisioning, water and erosion regulation, carbon sequestration, and social value. I've also given some examples where this research is being used to make decisions by land and water resource managers, public and private. But maybe you're asking yourself, how does this matter to you at home right now? Or as an ornery ornithologist in my office used to say, what's in it for me? Well, to remind you, an ecosystem services approach starts with understanding how nature works, in this case, rock detention structures, then putting value on nature's services, as I've described during this presentation, and then involving people. In the next couple slides, I'm going to explore some examples of potential market-based solutions, credit for trade, for which this science might be applied. And this is where you, Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public, come in. Mitigation banking is a system of credits and debits, where if development causes the loss of ecological function at one place, the developer then restores, preserves, or creates wetlands, streams, or other similar habitat at another place. And this is overseen by a regulatory agency to compensate the footprint of development. This is something that floodplain managers and restoration practitioners are very familiar with. So I was thinking about this and wondering about just one human's footprints. Is there a way to identify for our impacts and try to compensate for them? In this example, if we go back to the study we did on carbon sequestration potential, when I really think about our results that say approximately 100 tons of organic carbon are being rescued per structure, that sounds like a lot, and it is. But please consider that in 1 year, the average citizen in an industrialized country produces about 10 tons of carbon emissions. So the quick math for my almost 50-year-old self is that I would need to build and maintain 5 check dams like this to compensate for my carbon footprint. But what if I don't own property like this? Or what if I don't know how or have time or like building rock detention structures? Well, perhaps there is a group of people who specialize in building rock detention structures. Maybe they could be convinced to build extra rock detention structures, and I could then trade some chits with them to build some to cover my personal footprint. For a little cost comparison, I asked Kurt Vaughn, the director at Borderlands Restoration Network, how much they charge to install a check dam. He said that while it depends, approximately $75 to $100 per structure. And then I was thinking, if some people have a lot to give, they could donate lots of chits into this system to promote the welfare of others and the planet Earth. Maybe even a group of young workers could be trained and paid to build rock detention structures, the way that the CCC did back in the 1930s with the structures that we still see intact on the landscape today. We are working with the Biophilia Foundation and other partners to consider how a carbon market might evaluate restoration using rock detention structures so that people and businesses could try to compensate for their carbon footprint via other incentives. One of our partners in Mexico, Jose Manuel from CLO, brought this idea of blue carbon up, given his familiarity with the cap and trade emissions trading scheme that was recently launched in Mexico, the first emissions trading scheme pilot in Latin America. While blue carbon generally depicts coastal or marine wetlands, it has been documented that freshwater wetlands actually store more carbon than estuarine types. If we look at the average ecosystem service value per area per land type, according to researchers at the Trust for Public Land, we see that the wetlands have more economic value than bare grasslands, shrublands, and for the most part than urban areas or agriculture. So restoring historic cienagas contributes to the well-being of all people. And if you go back to my theory that rock detention structures are creating wetlands and arid lands, landowners who are installing these structures are creating gains for humankind, which could be incentivized. This week we celebrated World Water Day to raise awareness of people living without access to safe water. The annual theme established by the United Nations in 2021 is valuing water. If people want to reduce and offset their water footprints, moving forward towards a balance of water neutrality, you can address supply, demand, or both. On the demand side, you can manage the number of people or per capita use. On the supply side, our USGS science shows that installing rock detention structures is a strategy that can improve water provisioning services, which could help compensate people's water footprints. A goal of net zero can also help communities to be more resilient. Unfortunately, in the case of rock detention structures, there's no downsides. The ecosystem services are not exclusive, but rather additive. There are no trade-offs to justify one versus the other. So along with the benefits of carbon sequestration and water provisioning, the whole suite of ecosystem services come along. And as I've demonstrated, this is an ecosystem-based approach to climate change adaptation that is supported by science. Unprotected private lands are losing habitat for threatened and endangered species twice as fast as federal lands. The potential to leverage funding from ecosystem services and carbon offset markets could help conserve private lands. In the state of Colorado, researchers found that for every dollar invested in conservation programs, there is a $4 to $12 return in ecosystem services. As the public good of ecosystem services is recognized, land conservation and sustainable stewardship could be incentivized to help offset lots of our collective footprints. The United Nations are already recognizing ecosystem services and natural capital when measuring economic prosperity and well-being, going beyond the gross domestic product. Ecosystem accounts have been established for 34 countries already. And on June 5th, the UN is launching a decade of ecosystem restoration to increase international cooperation in combating climate change and safeguarding biodiversity. This aligns with their Convention on Biological Diversity's goal to protect 30% of the Earth by 2030. In January, the Biden-Harris administration declared a goal for the United States to conserve 30 by 30 as well. Conservation of land and water in the Madrean Archipelago, one of the world's precious 36 biodiversity hotspots, is paramount. To ensure that when our children and our children's children drive up this road in 25 years, they have the privilege to witness all of these amazing creatures doing their thing. It is critical to preserve the potential medical solutions, economic development, and adaptive responses in the natural world that we have yet to discover. My research documents that by restoring watersheds using rock detention structures, water can be preserved and land can be conserved to allow the ecosystems to heal and become more resilient. And by allowing these special areas to rewild, we acknowledge and safeguard this precious space and allow our apex predators to come home to the bioregion where the only jaguar in the United States has been living for the past 4 years. And I'm guessing that he is lonely. Our science can inform these efforts. In the first 3 years, CERC documented combined projects via annual reports. By 2016, we'd grown to 40 agencies and over 123 people, and we are still growing. At that time, all piecemealed together from the whole suite of agencies and shoestring budgets, CERC estimated exceeding $2 million per year. We've evolved into a large-scale restoration initiative with demonstrated economic value. Last year, Ron, Michelle, and I hosted a special issue of Air, Soil, and Water to showcase some of the fruits of our labors, which should be complete this month. Partners developed manuscripts describing historic wildfires and risks, planting pallets to support pollinators, impacts of restoration on vegetation and birds, documenting the need for wildlife corridors for busy roadways, and describing the Borderlands Earth Care Youth Institute, along with some of the articles I've already presented. These are all available online now. The effects of restoration using rock detention structures on hydrology, geomorphology, and vegetation have been quantified, translated into ecosystem services, and shared in the publications I've referenced from the Arid Land Water Harvesting Study. These papers are being cited by scientists from Canada, Chile, Peru, China, Egypt, Italy, and Spain, the Czech Republic, Colombia, France, Portugal, Mexico, Republic of Korea, the UK, Netherlands, Brazil, Syria, Africa, Malaysia, Iran, Tanzania, India, and Saudi Arabia. We hope that the lessons learned from the US-Mexico border can be adopted and supported to enable other vulnerable communities of dry lands to become more climate resilient and to preserve biodiversity for future generations. That is all I have for you tonight, but before you go, I want to introduce to you some of the stars of my show who I haven't already bragged about. These are the puzzle pieces of my story, the folks who are putting in extra hours and lending their skills to make a difference. And I hope that if you're looking for yourself that you see you. But if not, hopefully you are here, or you should be. And if it sounds like I'm just describing my friends in this presentation, it's because they are. These are some of my very best friends, colleagues, and neighbors, the scientists, restorationists, managers, and caring stakeholders of the Sky Island Restoration Collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was quite an impressive talk. You pretty much covered, I think, every mission area that the USGS has, and between you and your colleagues and all the partners together, may you continue to do all this wonderful and fantastic work and bring it all to us to share as you did today. Now, we're going to take a quick moment here. We're going to open it up to Q&A for anybody who will have a question out there for Laura. I'm going to remind everyone that if you want to ask a question, you can do so by clicking Q&A chat icon on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you are on your mobile device, you can click on the question mark icon located on the upper right-hand corner of the screen as well and submit your question. And let's just give everyone a moment here. That was all fantastic, Laura. Thank you so much for giving us your talk today. Let's see here. All right. All right, nobody's come through just yet, but let's give you a moment, Laura. I know you've been doing a lot of talking. I can also put out a quick reminder to everyone to join us next month for our lecture with Mike Tischler. He's the director of the National Geospatial Program with the USGS, and he's going to give his talk on April 22nd. So let's see what we've got here. We have a question. They say, Laura, such interesting information and creative outlook for a large-scale restoration in Arizona. Do you think rock detention structures as carbon offsets will become a reality?
I hope so. It's happening in other countries, and we're working on it right now. So I do think so. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let's see now. Everyone is saying thank you for your work. They're applauding you virtually. Lots of good stuff that you covered today. Let's see here. I have a quick question. Does the Jaguar have a name?
The Jaguar that's in the United States right now, I don't think has a name, but there was just a Jaguar that was sighted south of the border on the CLO property that has a name, and his name is El Bonito. Oh,
means the beautiful one or the pretty one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We got a question here. Someone is asking, are there areas where check dams wouldn't be appropriate?
Yes, definitely. Yep. They, like I said, I'm not a restoration practitioner, but having hung around them for a while, it does seem that when you walk a channel, different practitioners will identify different restoration techniques depending on the types of soils and vegetation and slope of the area. So all of that would need to be scoped out very, very well beforehand.
All right. You're getting thank yous for all of your work, just to let you know. A lot of people appreciate your work. Someone is asking, was the term describing arid land wetlands ciénagas?
So ciénagas are wetlands that are in this neck of the woods. So they're an interchangeable word, really, as far as I can tell. You know, finding ciénagas or wetlands in arid lands is pretty exciting.
Okay. And someone is asking approximately how many check walls are there in Arizona?
I have no idea.
Okay.
there's a lot. Just on my partner's properties, there's, you know, thousands and thousands, and then there were, I think, thousands put in by the CCC back in the 30s. But since then and before that, there's been different structures put into place.
All right. Okay. Well, Laura, I think that's it for this evening. You did wonderful. Thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us out there virtually live. We do apologize for the prior technical difficulties. This was our first one, so thank you again all for your patience. And Laura, thank you too for working with us and your patience as well. Well, everyone, I hope again you come back next month on April 22nd at 7:00 p.m. Pacific time. And until next time, please join us. And oh, don't forget to please visit our website where Laura's lecture will be posted later for on-demand viewing at www.usgs.gov/PLS. Thank you and good night.